A Shalom Akim Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to just do another continuation of a topic that was on my mind in regards to having a good name, having a good reputation. And I wanted to use an example of one of our other forefathers that actually had, a good reputation, right? And how invaluable, I should say, it is to have one, when you carry yourself, when you're going about your business, worldly affairs and all that. You know what I'm saying? Not behaving as, the old man, or behaving as, nigga or anything like that. And, sometimes we have like these tendencies, we're trying to get rid of, whatever it is, right? But as a matter of fact, let me start there in Colossians. Then I'll get to because it's really, it's an ongoing, constant fight. It's something that never actually, stops. This is Colossians chapter 3, and 8. And it says, and I read to verse 10, and it says, "But now ye have put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with these deeds." So the old man is an example of, having, these particular, deeds, that would end up so that you would end up in situations that cause, constant strife, that cause problems, cause you in different situations, right? This is verse 10, and it says here that ye have put on the new man, which is renewed after the image of him that created him, right? So, we're renewed in that image of, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, the example that he laid out, right? So, and this is not to say that you're not going to have examples of people that don't like you, right? But the point really is that is to really have just a good reputation, because there's going to be examples. And as a matter of fact, this example I thought was a very good example of some, like, a situation where you deal uprightly amongst your peers and your people that you might be surrounded with in your worldly affairs, or whatever it might be, on the job or whatever. And not because, and even in those situations, not everybody will like you, but the point really is that you deal, in an upright sense, right? But there's still going to be people, there's still going to be spirits that, jump on people. They don't like you for a certain way because, the scriptures talk about how men love darkness rather than light, because there's a certain aura that you emanate, and people are going to be very, very disturbed by that. It's just going to disturb their spirit without you even actually saying anything. But, I thought this is a good example going into our forefather Mordecai. So I just wanted to read another precept, and I'll just jump to the story real quick, just for edification, right? This is Proverbs chapter 22, real quick, verse 1. And it says here, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold," right? So it shows you the importance, of a good name, right? So when you go to that word name in the ancient Hebrew, and it says sham, that's where you get the word name from. Right, that's the one of our forefathers, going back to the sons of Noah. So Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? That's how you say Shem in the ancient Hebrew. That's where those people, when that's where that buzzword comes from. When people say Sem, right? It's really they're referring to Shem, right? But these people don't have any understanding in regards to what they're saying or who that person is, right? So this is what the word means. Is Shem, H8034, and it says here name, reputation, fame, glory. So through the sons of God would come out of that particular line of Shem, going down to Arphaxad, Peleg, Eber, so on and so forth, down to Abraham's father Terah, then Abraham, the Hebrew, right? And Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, right? And then Jacob begat his 12 sons, right? So we were, the important thing is that they were to be a kingdom of kings and priests, right? So there's a certain sort of conduct and uprightness that they're supposed to actually, walk in, right? So, as a matter of fact, okay, I'll get the story. I'll get the story first. So I want to go to the book of Esther, dealing with our forefather, Mordecai, right? And this is, I thought, was a good example also because it also showed the, him dealing still uprightly and in his space, being in captivity, just like how we are in captivity. But at the same time, he's still dealing with somebody that is very displeased by him, which was Haman, right? A descendant of Agag, right? So I'm gonna jump around in the book of Esther. So I'm gonna start here just to establish context. So, as a matter of fact, one second, I want to go to what he actually was doing. So his title, right? Just bear with me. Okay, this is the additions to Esther, chapter 11, verse 2. And it says, in the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, in the first day of the month Nisan, Mordecaius, which is Mordecai, the son of Jairus, the son of Simei, the son of Sisai, of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream, who was a Jew and dwelt in the city of Susa, a great man, being a servitor in the king's court. Right, so I wanted to add, looked up what do servitors do, or what they did during the time of the ancient Medo-Persian Empire, right? So this is during the time of that second beast that was prophesied to come by our forefather Daniel, that came after the Babylonians, the ancient Babylonians, right? So I typed it into Perplexity, AI here. What did the servitors do in the king's court in the Medo-Persian Empire, just to get some understanding in regards to the rules. So it says here, main types of servitors in their work, it says personal attendants and body servants. It says these included eunuchs and close household slaves who would dress the king, attended him in private rooms, carried a seat or a footstool beside him at audiences and controlled access to his presence. It says some held very specific posts as chair carrier, footstool carrier, bow case carrier, or cupbearer. So remember how Nehemiah was a cupbearer, right? To the king Artaxerxes. I believe it was Artaxerxes II, right? And it says here these could actually be high status positions near to the king. So a lot of these guys, even though they were servitors, they were working in very close proximity to the king, right? So lower down here it says royal bodyguard and security officials. The king surrounded by an elite guard commanded by high official, often called Hazara Patis, master of 1,000, which is known in Greek as a chiliarch. Let me see. Let me look up that word just for edification. So a chiliarch was a military officer commanding a unit of approximately 1,000 men, right? So basically a man over 1,000, right? So during Achaemenid Persia, they were known as Chili. The Chiliarchos was a high-ranking official, sometimes acting as the king's vizier. Okay. So basically, somebody who looks over 1,000, right? So this is a high-ranking general or officer, just to get more understanding, right? Okay. Let me just go back, read a little bit more, then I'll go back to, then I'll get to the story, right? So certain servitors, they often acted as household stewards, managers. Let's see here. Okay, so Achaemenid kings, so which is just another name for the Persian and Medo-Persian Empire. It says here relied on trained bureaucratic elite at court, so scribes, secretaries, translators who drafted documents, sealed them, and maintained the archives. These officials in major administrative languages, right, carried out the king's orders throughout the empire. It says religious specialists. Among the Medes were a priestly caste, often identified as magi, who served as advisors, priests, dream interpreters, soothsayers. Right? Yes. You have an idea of that during the time of Daniel, right? But they're not. They're basically like priests on the left hand side, if that makes sense, right? It says here just a little bit more. Medical, ceremonial, and service staff. It says court servitors often included physicians, grooms, stable hands, cooks, bakers, wine stewards, or other skilled workers who looked after the king's health, his horses, his chariots, his elaborate banquets, his ceremonies of the court. So some attendants had visible ceremonial roles, such as holding a parasol over the king, or carrying a fly whisk behind him in processions or palace reliefs. So I'm just reading some of the ins and outs of some of the things that a servitor would do. So they would be doing like a plethora of different things. So they weren't just limited to actually just doing one thing, right? So you had some that would be in very, very close proximity to the king. Some of them were looking after his affairs. Some were drafting documents. Just to get an understanding of more of what Mordecai was actually doing during this time, right? Because our people were a special people, right? So a lot of the times, we had very prominent positions in the different captivities that we're in because we operated in a mindset of the fear of the Lord, right? So let me go. Okay, so let me go to the story, and then I'll hopefully this lesson will be edifying. So this is Esther chapter 2, verse 21, and it says, in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, and it says, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof of Mordecai's name, When inquisition was made of a matter, it says it was found out, and therefore they were both hanged on a tree, right? So they found out about their schemish plot, right? And what happened to them was that they were both hanged, right? And it says, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump to the 6th chapter now. So, because basically, we get, when you go through the next couple chapters, then that's when you get some of the ins and outs between the dynamic between Mordecai and Haman. Haman, because Mordecai didn't bow to him, right? And Haman was very displeased at Mordecai's behavior, right? So so there, just to show you, like, people within your proximity, just because you don't bend to them, not in a, no pun intended, they feel very they're very disturbed by your presence. They're very disturbed by your spirit, right? But Mordecai, still operates in a sense of uprightness in his role, so to speak, right? That's the point. In having him having a good reputation, despite the fact that Mordecai, I'm sorry, not Mordecai, but Haman, wanted to actually, push forth a certain sort of decree and commandment to actually persecute and put hell upon our people, right? So I want to I want to jump across to the 6th chapter, right? just to kind of add to the point, right? This is Esther chapter 6, verse 1, and it says, on that night could not the king sleep, and commanded to bring the book of the record of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So remember, just like we read about this particular deed action, that Mordecai still, he found out the plot between these two of the king's chamberlains. This was actually documented, right? So here it says, this is verse 2, and it was written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, and the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. So this is a king, right? So he's tired. He probably can't sleep, so he probably has, he has servitors for all these different, positions. Not like, you're tired today, and then you wake up, and then you're like, okay, let me maybe go do a little walk, or maybe I just, put on the TV or something. You have staff surrounded by you, or servitors in this case, servitors constantly around you, because you're such, you're a high important individual, right? To attend to every single of your needs. You probably have staff just to clip your toenails, right? So, let me go to, where was I? This is verse 3, and it said, the king said, what honor and dignity have been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that minister unto him, there is nothing done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? And it says, Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house, to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Right. So this was Haman's plot, because Haman, don't like Haman don't like Mordecai, right? This is verse 5. And it says here, the king's servants said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than to himself? So Haman came in because Haman, in the back of his mind, he got his own plan. His plan is not to show honor to Mordecai. His plan is to, like, yo, I want to hang this guy, man. I don't like Mordecai, right? That's the evil intent, behind Haman, right? So continuing on, it says this is verse 7, and it says, Haman answered the king, and for the man whom delighteth to honor, let royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is to set upon his head. And let this apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, to bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. So Haman's thinking is like, yo, man, this is going to be me, you know? And then the king said unto Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, and thou hast said even, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth in the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken, right? So all this, talk about, royal apparel, king, that was suggested by Haman. Haman didn't think that the king was going to have that done for Mordecai, right? It says here, then the king said unto Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, and thou hast said do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate, and let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, because he's probably burning. He probably has some inward agitations that he's feeling that he's, he had a plot to get, to have Mordecai hanged, right? He doesn't like Mordecai, right? So it says here, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, and thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And it says Mordecai came again at the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning, having his head covered, right? So all this, this royal apparel that he thought about, that he was meditating in his mind, and because he was probably thinking, man, this is going to be done, for someone else, but he wasn't, he got caught, his plans. It shows you that his plans ended up becoming futile, right? And that own plan that he had, to delight against to delight, not delight I should say, but to put onto Mordecai, his evil intent I should say, that evil intent eventually fell upon his own head, right? So the point really is that the work, the thing that the uprightness, the noble. As a matter of fact, I'll get this because it's very interesting. It was described as royal apparel. Let me go to because we have royal apparel as well, and it says the fear of the Lord. This is Sirach 1:18, and it says the fear of the Lord is a crown of wisdom, making peace and perfect health to flourish, both which are gifts of the Most High, and in rejoice and enlargeth their rejoicing that love him. All right, so it's royal apparel that we wear. It's a glorious robe. I think that also is in Sirach somewhere as well, right? It's what actually makes us decked out as a people, right? So so you see here how Mordecai was basically was in a position, and he was in a very upright and had a very good reputation. Things were written about him, right? So it just shows you, like, how valuable it is, because back in these times you didn't have, what do you call, like, resumes and all this type of stuff that people use to get a job and so on and so forth. But it's basically he had a certain level of reputation, and that's how we're supposed to be as sons of God anyway, right? But our people have lost their way because they have forgotten their resting place, and deny essentially the importance of their nationality and heritage, and actually being in tune with their power, right? So, I just wanted to just read that, as in terms of, like, conduct and reputation, because you never know how a lot of that reputation might actually end up helping you in times of trouble, in times of need, right? Because if there's one thing I've meditated on, some things is, when the scriptures talk about how my servants shall eat, you never know how that reputation might actually come in a favorable position for you in times of trouble, right? Looking at the way these times are going, because Esau, how Esau is, right? Esau is the type of person that looks, as the scriptures say, Satan goeth about seeking that who he may devour, right? So, you know, they're always looking for, when you walk in a certain upright sense, they're looking for a way for you, a way for you to slip, a way for you to, because especially if you look like, a typical, like, so-called Negro, or have dark skin or whatever, right? Obviously the Israelites are known as, you know will be as an infamy, right? So we were not always known to actually have a good reputation, but having a good reputation actually helps your cause, right? So knowing these things, it can actually help you, you know. But I just thought I would just read that. Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.